I speak to you this morning in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. This morning, I want to talk about guns and gun violence, because I am so sick of continuing to hear about violence by weapons, guns in our country. My heart is just broken with hearing of yet again another mass shooting. So often Jesus talks about laying down our lives, not taking lives. In fact, when one of his disciples raised the sword to take a life or to defend Jesus, he told him to stop. Jesus tells us to take up our cross, to follow him. The readings today, the Psalm, the Old Testament reading are all about the commands of God. The Psalm, every line of it was about your commands, your decrees, your precepts, about so many definitions. And I want to start with one of these covenants. It's all about covenant. And the covenant that we're going to talk about today as we consider gun violence is our baptismal covenant, a vow that vows that each of us made in baptism. One of which is, will you strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being? This vow that we've made is amazing because it starts off with striving. This is action. We are going to take action for justice and peace among all people, the dignity of every human being. Because of this vow of ours, and because of Jesus's model and teaching along these lines from which this derives, the gospel is political. Because, well, polis, the word political comes from the Greek word polis. Polis was simply a Greek city-state, a state or society characterized by a sense of community. The polis was simply a gathering of people. And politics are how that gathering of people is governed. So, and how that gathering of people is protected, and laws that are put in place to guide that polis, that gathering of people. And because of our baptismal covenant, when it comes to matters of justice and peace in our nation, we are called as Christians to speak out, because yes, the gospel has political implications. In fact, digging deeper, the Reverend King calls us to a deep truth. He says, he who passively accepts evil is as much involved in it as he who helps to perpetuate it. He who accepts evil without protesting against it is really cooperating with it. And Jesus modeled this in his life and ministry. Whenever he faced injustice, cruelty, violence, he confronted it. When the adulterous woman was going to be stoned, he confronted those who were about to kill her and said, may he without sin cast the first stone. When he encountered people who were outcast, he drew them in. When he encountered exploitation of people in the temple, he got crazy and turned over the tables and drove that exploitation out. The truth is that it's kind of like if we were walking by a sidewalk and saw someone suddenly get beat up by other people. If we don't do something, we're complicit in a way. We are obligated by our faith, the ethics and morals of our faith, to respond to injustice, violence, and bigotry. So I want to take a moment as a community, because it is important to our faith, to watch a brief video together.
Today on Capitol Hill, Asian American celebrities and lawmakers testified about this discrimination and violence against their community. New York Congresswoman Grace Meng gave a powerful testimony. Listen.
We cannot turn a blind eye to people living in fear. I want to go back to something that Mr. Roy said earlier. Your president and your party and your colleagues can talk about issues with any other country that you want, but you don't have to do it by putting a bullseye on the back of Asian Americans across this country, on our grandparents, on our kids. This hearing was to address the hurt and pain of our community and to find solutions, and we will not let you take our voice away from us.
Powerful testimony, as I say, from Congresswoman Grace Meng. And let me go back to Eva Pilgrim on this. Eva, you've spoken out among us and for us here to help kind of raise awareness. And for me, it's, you know, forgive the stupidity. The question is the country going backwards on this, on the ways Asian Americans are seen and treated, or did I just not know?
I think it's one of those things where a lot of people really just didn't know. The subtle, nuanced racism that I think Asians experience, and culturally, you know, a lot of Asian cultures, and let's be clear, Asian encompasses like a lot of different kinds of people in a very large region of the country where their cultures are very different, but a good portion of those cultures have this sort of mindset, this immigrant mindset where you don't draw negative attention to yourself. You put your head down, you do a good job. If someone does something bad to you, just keep trying to move on and avoid the conflict. And I think that in some ways, because Asians as a group have not been incredibly loud and vocal about the experiences of, you know, racism and hate that we have seen previously, I think a lot of people just weren't aware. I mean, many of us can remember people making fun of Asian kids on the playground, either for slanty eyes. One of my earliest childhood memories is my sister beating up some boy on the playground because he made fun of me because I was speaking Korean and she didn't understand what I was saying. And I think a lot of us have that memory, and we have memories of these sort of stereotypes of Asians, but oftentimes those stereotypes of Asians are often seen as positive unless they're not. And the ones that aren't seen as positive aren't really given a lot of attention, right? Like, we think of Asian students as really smart. We don't talk a lot about how Asian women are hypersexualized or viewed as like the subject of fetishes and prostitution. We don't talk about that nearly as much, and you don't see Asians stomping and making a big scene about it. And I think what's happened in the last year is the crimes that we've seen against people in our community have been so fast and furious. And you heard the Congresswoman speaking. The fear that exists is real. And I think that's the thing about what happened in Atlanta. A lot of Asian people I've spoken to were waiting for that really horrible thing to happen. And I feel like they see that. And they went, nobody heard us saying there were these attacks on our elderly people happening all over the place. Crimes against Asians went up 833% in New York City alone. That's a crazy astronomical number. And yet nothing was done. And now look at this. A mass shooting has happened, and they've targeted this very negative view of Asian women. And the shooter is a person who went to 3 Asian spas. He didn't choose other kinds of sex shops. He chose 3 Asian spas. Maybe it's not a hate crime, but I think it says something about his view of Asian women specifically, and I think it's very closely tied to how a lot of these people feel about those negative views of us are just pushed away. And they're tired, and they're scared, and I think that's why we're hearing people really speaking up right now.
And Eva, I noticed you said maybe this wasn't a hate crime. And to some, it may have sounded clear-cut yesterday when police said that the suspect says that these shootings were not racially motivated, blaming his sex addiction for his actions. But Police haven't yet ruled out that this could be a hate crime. It all seems a bit more nuanced than it might appear on the surface. Can you just explain that a little bit?
Well, I think, the thing that people have to remember about hate crimes is that they're often very difficult to prosecute. Georgia, as a state, has a very strong hate crime law, so there's a better possibility that we could potentially see a charge there and that charge prosecuted fully. But, you have to keep in mind, it's the one crime where they have to prove the motive. You don't have to prove the motive in any other crime, but in a hate crime, you have to prove that the suspect's motive was driven out of hate. And that is difficult to do because we don't have mind readers, and neither do police. And so, while we can't at this moment say for sure that we know this is a hate crime, and police can't say that, and I know they're investigating that, I think we have to look at some of the systemic issues that shape the way that people maybe unknowingly think and relate to Asian people. This idea that we're constant foreigners, many Asians in this country were born in America. They've only ever known American. Some of them don't speak any other language, but yet oftentimes we're asked, where are you from? And when I tell them I'm from South Carolina, they're also, no, where are you really from? No, I'm from South Carolina. And then you'll hear people ask you, oh, do you speak English? Of course I speak English. Like, it's almost insulting, but that's the view that people have when they see an Asian face, this immediate assumption that you're a foreigner. And I think in a lot of ways that devalues people. It makes them seem less than, less significant, less important, and easier for regular people to disconnect their emotions and their feelings and their sympathy towards those people that are experiencing these really awful crimes right now.
All right, Eva Pilgrim, so much more we could cover on this topic, but we appreciate you taking the time to break it down for us.
Thank you, guys.
We sure do. Thanks, Eva.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos.
So in digging into the news after this event, I want to share with you something I came upon. Robert Aaron Long, the man charged with 8 counts of murder, reportedly strolled into a Cherokee County gun store on Tuesday, put down his money, passed an instant background check, and walked out of the store with his weapon. There was no waiting period. There was no mandatory safety class. There was simply a transaction that experts say might have only taken minutes to complete. Voters are more closely scrutinized in Georgia. Women seeking to terminate a pregnancy are more inconvenienced by the state's 24-hour waiting period intended to prevent impulsive decision-making. So we pray every week as a community for victims of gun violence. And I want to dig a little deeper into gun-related deaths. If you look here, the red is homicide rates. The US is 10, 15, 20 times higher than any of these other comparable high-income first world countries. Suicide rates drastically higher than any of these other ones. This is just appalling. And Americans are more likely to kill each other with guns 25 times the rate of other high income. There you go. There's the math. It's a sickness that has to be addressed. And it is a matter of faith because it is a matter of peace and justice. 155% more people are shot in incidences where assault weapons or high capacity magazines are used. Having a gun in a domestic violence situation increases the woman's risk of being killed by 500%. That's significant. That's more than significant. These problems are real. It is a plague in our country. And let's dig deeper. Here's where it starts. The Second Amendment. Deacon Pam, would you read this for us?
A well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
I didn't catch those first three words, just the first three words, or four. Oops, you're muted.
A well-regulated militia.
Aha, a well-regulated militia. That's the context in which this amendment was written. And where are we at today? Oh, let's also talk about the guns when this amendment was written. We were talking about, see case in point above, guns in the day of our founding fathers, and below, guns that are available to the masses today. Not even comparing apples to apples. It is a whole different world today than when that amendment was written. With other lethal things, we have safety requirements. Let's take cars, for example, because there are thousands of deaths by cars each day, each year. We have safety requirements because they're lethal. People are required to have licenses. There are restrictions. People have to have liability insurance. But in the US, pro-gun lobbyists spent $54.4 million in 2016 to keep unfettered access to weapons, to ammo, to anyone in our country. And they do this under the guise of a 501c4 organization that can hide the donors. Not 501c3, C4 means they can then pass money on to politicians, political parties, lobbying for laws that protect this unfettered access. What we need are sane laws to protect the peace of people and the dignity of human life. We need background checks, safety trainings, safety requirements, liability insurance for those who hold weapons, limiting purchases by people with violent records or suspected terrorists, and banning assault weapons and high-capacity magazines altogether. And why are we talking about this on Sunday together? Why is this the topic of the sermon? Because of that baptismal vow to strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being. That word strive is underlined because this isn't just about prayers and good intentions, good thoughts and prayers. We are called by the morals and ethics of our faith to take action to work for justice and peace for all people. The Episcopal Church has general convention that is structured much like the governance of our country. It has the House of Bishops, the House of Deputies. Whenever they gather for general convention, they pass legislation addressing the concerns of the world. And general convention has spoken out because this matter is important to us as Episcopalians. In 1997, the General Convention passed this resolution entitled Urging Restrictions on Sale, Ownership, and Use of Firearms that resolved that legislation to ban carrying concealed firearms be encouraged, resolved that Congress be urged to adopt legislation requiring the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms to develop regulations to delineate appropriate safety standards for the use of firearms and circumstances under which they may be used to monitor and enforce compliance with said safety standards. The Church has spoken out because this is a matter of faith. This is a matter of respecting human life. And the Church spoke out yet again 3 years later in a resolution entitled a request the removal of handguns and assault weapons, that requests members of the Episcopal Church of the United States of America, that's you and me, to acknowledge that the violence in our communities is encouraged and enabled by the presence of guns, and resolve that this convention call upon all members of the Church, that's us, All Saints, to work intentionally in their several committees, legislators, and institutions towards the removal of handguns and assault weapons from our homes, other residential communities, and vehicles. And because this problem is persistent, and we are up against that strong force of lobbyists with millions of dollars, yet again, General Convention spoke up in 2015 with a larger resolution entitled Implement Laws to Decrease Gun Violence that sought laws that require permits to carry concealed weapons, banning the importation of conversion kits, turning guns into automatic weaponry, tightening laws against gun trafficking, prohibiting people from purchasing without safety training, recognizing the impact of laws on gun ownership, and promoting education. Our church has spoken and has continued to speak because this is a matter that we must strive to address. It goes back to King. He who passively accepts evil is as much involved in it as he who helps to perpetuate it. He who accepts evil without protesting against it is really cooperating with it. We are called by our faith, by our baptismal covenant, to take action, to speak out, to address the injustice that is taking lives in our nation every day. And there is something we can do. I'm not going to spin the wheels of the problem without pointing towards the solution. Episcopal Peace Fellowship, epfnational.org, is a national organization of Episcopalians seeking to address matters of justice and peace, to strive together to really address these areas, to bring about change. Not just gun violence. They have action groups around areas of racial justice, anti-war, death penalty abolition, environmental justice, gender violence prevention, gun violence prevention, nonviolent conflict resolution, Palestine-Israeli network, and more. epfnational.org. Together we can gather, we can combine our forces to be agents of peace, agents of healing. I pray that the Spirit will continue to guide us, to inspire us, to give us discernment as to how we are called to strive together for justice and peace. Amen.